Have you ever seen someone who is a full-time reseller and thought, holy smokes, how on earth are you finding so much product on a regular basis? Or maybe even be watching some of your favorite sellers that are doing live sales and go, man, how are you doing so many sales weekly and have enough time to purchase inventory? Well, in today's video, we are finally going to be starting our mini series on how to purchase wholesale and liquidation. We are going to have 3 videos for this series, so make sure you hit subscribe so that way you don't miss any of them. The first video that we are going to be doing is terms. We need to know the lingo when it comes to purchasing wholesale and liquidation. So this video might be a tiny bit longer. Make sure you get a pencil and a pad because you are not going to want to miss all these terms. These are the things that you need to know before you hit purchase. So let's get into the video. The first thing we need to go over is what is liquidation and what is wholesale. Personally, for me on this channel, I have used them interchangeably because I just don't know if you guys understand what the terms are. However, they are 2 distinctly different things. So wholesale is the practice where a buyer buys a pallet of wholesale goods. From what this description says, it creams off the best stuff to sell separately on places like eBay or Amazon for higher prices, and then sells the rest to unsuspecting businesses who think they're buying good quality goods when most certainly they are not. This is a really interesting description that they've actually put in here because I have actually had this encounter, and we're going to go into that in some other videos. But basically, wholesale is simply purchasing in bulk inventory for a wholesale price. And there's another description I found later on that I can go into details with that, but that is what I would personally say it is you're getting something at like a wholesale price to then be able to sell retail. Can you sell things at retail prices as a reseller? Not all the time. If you had a brick and mortar store, you know, say you have a Free People item and the dress is $128, you probably could call for that in a brick and mortar store. But when it comes to selling stuff on eBay and POSHMARK, typically people are looking for a more discounted rate because why would they purchase full retail from you when they can go buy it from like such as Free People and then have a return policy in place that they don't have to worry about, like, am I gonna have to pay on shipping, so on and so forth. Clothing liquidation is not to be confused with winding up with insolvent company. The term liquidation, when applied to retail wholesale, refers to the practice where retail companies offload stock that is in surplus to requirements for a variety of reasons. Basically, what it is stating is most retailers need to have a way of liquidating product, whether it is because it is a change in season and they need to get this stuff off the floor to be able to bring in the next holiday or bring in the next season, or if it was just a surplus that they had in their back room that now doesn't apply again to the season that they are going into and they just need to offload it. That is where liquidation comes in. Typically, it is a pallets or a Gaylord. Again, we'll go into those explanations soon, where it can be literally just a big pallet full of clothing that still has its hangers, still has its security tags. They are just trying to find a way to liquidate the product. And typically when you have a liquidation that you're purchasing, you're getting things much cheaper even compared to a wholesale value. The problem with that typically is it's not going to be manifested. If it is manifested, it's going to be more expensive. And again, we will get into that term very shortly. So another term that I found, or description I should say, in regards to wholesale clothing is, in short, apparel that is sold in bulk quantity at a cost that is lower than the retail price. Wholesalers sell bulk clothing to retailers and then resell the individual items at a higher price, which I feel like is a little more cohesive to what I believe wholesale is. Okay, now that you understand the difference between wholesale and liquidation, let's go into all of the different lingo that you might hear when you are looking at purchasing any large bulk quantity of either clothing or merchandise that you sell on any of your resale platforms. So I really try to think about, like, what are some terms that have been said to me over the last like 4 to 5 months that I have been doing this to help you guys best start to get an idea of what you need to be thinking about, what questions you need to be asking before you start purchasing this inventory. So I'm going to go through this list and I'm also going to be explaining it as I go. So the first one is irregulars. What I have heard this term being used as is someone comes to me and says, hey, I have a bulk, let's just keep using Free People, it's the easiest one to say. Hey, I have in bulk Free People items right now. Would you like to purchase? They are irregulars. What irregulars typically means is the manufacturer went through their lineup when they were creating the products, and there was like one stitch that was out of place. Maybe there was a hole in the stitching. Maybe the pattern didn't work out correctly. Somewhere in their eyes, it didn't pass the test to be sold at retail. So irregulars can be something that is a very mild fix all the way up to not salvageable. So that is something to bear in mind if someone comes to you and says, hey, I have a ton of Free People. You're like, great, that's awesome. They're irregulars. Bear in mind that's what they are referring to. A lot of palettes that I have seen before can also say customer returns. You see this with Amazon, you see this with Target, you see this with Nordstrom's. They have policies that just pretty much accept a return for whatever reason. So sometimes someone could have gotten something from Christmas and it just didn't fit right, and so they wanted to get it returned. All the way up to the people who have totally worn this item out, had the time of their life, at a club or wherever, maybe even had their period. This might be TMI, but this is literally facts, like things that have actually happened to me. And then they return the item. I actually one time had a Nordstrom piece that was a bodysuit, and it literally had someone's period in the bottom of the suit. So you get a mix of a lot of different things. Customer returns can be very profitable, but also very risky. And that's the one thing that I do want to say across this whole board when it comes to doing wholesale or liquidation is you are taking a risk. The very last video that I'm going to be doing in this series, you're gonna want to listen to, because I will go into full details of the pros and cons and the literal stories that I have experienced over the last 4 to 5 months when it comes to purchasing in bulk clothing. The next thing is samples. So again, let's go back to Free People. You could have a wholesaler say, hey, I have a ton of Free People right now, but they are samples. Samples I have seen in both like auctions when I have purchased lost cargo, or when I have been purchasing a brand specifically, hearing about samples. Samples is where the company is trying to determine what they're gonna have their next line be for the upcoming season. It could be a year away, it could be literally the following season, and that product might not actually make it to market. Typically, they'll have a tag that isn't like the normal, again, in this case, like Free People tag. It might look different. They might have even a piece of cardboard or a piece of paper stapled to that tag that says, I really like this color, let's keep this, let's do this for this season. And it's kind of neat because you essentially get to see like the behind the scenes of like what the company is doing. You may have even heard of sample sales before. I have heard of LA being a really good place for sample sales. I've heard Spell have it before, Peruvian collection. Gosh, I cannot remember off the top of my head. I apologize. But a lot of these companies, they're still really good product. It was just their samples that they were testing to determine what they wanted to have go to market. So it's not to say that samples are a bad thing, but again, if you end up with a plethora of it, typically they either like very small sizes or really large sizes, because again, it was just like their model. It wasn't supposed to go to market with all the variety of sizes. So if you hear someone say, hey, I can sell you samples, ask the question, what are the sizes? Because typically they are the smaller sizes, like extra small to extra small to small, or in the extra large, even larger frame. So just depending on what you like to sell, that is going to be an important distinction that you need to ask when you are hearing you have an opportunity to purchase samples. And as I mentioned, LA, I know Portland, I know New York, there's a lot of like locations that you can look at specific brands, or even just Google like sample sales, and you could then go in and essentially cherry pick. And when I use the term cherry pick, what I mean is, you know, when you're going to the Goodwills, the Goodwill outlets, your Savers, you're essentially going in and cherry picking out of that store what inventory you think is going to sell best for you. Whether whether it's because you're doing live sales and you know your customers' sizes, or you know specific brands that just sell anytime you list it on Poshmark, eBay, or Mercari. You're gonna want to go in and cherry pick. That's the same with samples. You can go into a sample sale and then you can say, hey, this is a size small, hey, this is a size large, this is what I wanna pick up. And then you don't have to worry about buying in bulk blindly. And that's, again, where a risk factor comes into play, is you purchasing in bulk 500 to 1,000 pieces sent to your doorstep. Hey, that part's great because you didn't have to go out and shop for hours to purchase it, but then was it worth the risk? Because now you just may have ended up with 500 to 1,000 pieces that were size small. Different grading. So I did find a term in here and I'm going to pull this up, but when you're talking about clothing, I've seen this a lot when I'm looking at auction sites. They will say the clothing is in grade C condition or grade A condition. Here are what the different terminologies mean. Grade A means it's secondhand clothing that has no defects, is fully functional and fashionable. I feel like even grade A would also, not just secondhand, it could be also new merchandise. That's just what this terminology was said right here. Grade B is secondhand clothing that's fully functional but may have a flaw or two. Grade B clothing is secondhand clothing that's functional with a possibility of some small defects, but is still fashionable. Grade C means fair. It is in good condition, but potentially has visible wear or tears. Grade C you want to be careful about because sometimes they will put the description, it is in class C condition, but it's truly non-salvageable. Salvage merchandise consists of custom returns, floor damage, and samples. Due to this mixed assortment, some items may be damaged. However, damageable does not always mean unsellable. This depends on the product and the damage. That said, the majority will not be damaged. Personally, when I've seen salvage merchandise, it is typically like it is past the point of no return. It's one of those things where if you are someone who loves to upcycle, this would be your jam. It's like the jeans that you grab and it literally has like a tear down the crotch that like, it's not even in the stitching, it's literally in the denim. Unless you can put a big patch over it or you have a fun way of threading or embroidery, there's no way you're gonna be able to sell this item. Typically, salvage merchandise is frustrating. It's something that's gonna take more time than you want to be able to have. You wanna, in my opinion, I wanna have inventory sent to my doorstep that I can literally hang up photograph list or sell it in a live show. You don't want a lot of like fixing, having to take off the tags, to treat a stain, to wash it, to dry it, and then put the tags back on. Like there's so much work involved with that. You then have to start asking your question, is the price that I'm paying per item worth the amount of work that I'm having to put in to then actually sell the piece? But again, if you are a boutique that loves to upcycle, this might be your jam and a great opportunity to get really good brands at a very affordable price. Manifested and non-manifested. A manifest means it is a list of product. So this could be just the title of the item. It could be a line item Excel sheet that says the MSRP, which is like the manufacturer's suggested retail price, or it could be the literal link to the picture of the stock photo. Manifest typically means that they put in the work to create a spreadsheet to let you know what each item was and what the retail price is. And typically that means it's because they're wanting to get more money for this palette, because they want to say the MSRP of this palette is $30,000. Therefore, we're gonna charge you $12,000. The problem with that is MSRP, as I mentioned before, does not equate to what the resale value is. So sometimes doing a non-manifested palette is better. It's risky, but it is better because no one had to look at every single item and put it on a spreadsheet, and they're not trying to inflate what they think the cost of the palette could be, because again, the resale value might be less than what the retail value would be, and typically it actually is. So that is something that you're going to want to ask if you are talking to wholesalers, if you are talking to liquidators, if you are looking at different auctions. You want to ask yourself the question, is it manifested or is it non-manifested? Most of the time I've seen partial manifest. There are a couple different websites, and again, we'll go into that in video number 2 of this series, where we're looking at some of those aspects to a listing directly. But most of the time I've seen more of a partial manifest, where it's gonna give you an idea. They might even just send you a bunch of photos of what the palette looks like so you can kind of determine. But again, they're always gonna put the best stuff on the top and make it look like a great palette, and you never know what's gonna be underneath the palette. So food for thought, is it manifested or is it unmanifested? Gaylord. So I mentioned this earlier. A Gaylord is basically a palette. I didn't understand this when I first started. People would say, yeah, I have 3 Gaylords for you. And I'm like, what the heck is that? It is a big giant palette that is literally put on a pallet. You know what I'm talking about? Like the pallets that are the wood, and then they put a big box on the top of it. That is a Gaylord. Didn't know that before. BOL. This was another term that was said to me early on. It's yeah, I have your BOL ready for you. And I was like, huh, okay. What the heck is that? The BOL is an order bill of lading. Lading? My husband's gonna laugh at me hearing that term. It's sometimes referred to as a negotiation bill. Title to the shipment is confirmed to order of the shipper or party name in the letter of credit and may be transferred to another party by signature of the title holder, usually by endorsing the back of the BOL. Okay, basically all this is the invoice to the trucking company. And this is another question you're gonna wanna ask. Can my, if you purchased a pallet, can my pallet be depalletized? Can it basically go from being in a big giant Gaylord and turn into boxes, because typically that's cheaper to ship it? Or are you going to ship it by truck? Or are you going to ship it by rail? I didn't realize that people might still use rail. Call me 21st century or something, but I actually had 8 pallets sent to me one time by rail. That is something to notate, because again, in my number 3 video, I'm gonna talk to you about all the good, bad, and indifferent when it comes to pallets. That sucked because they did not wrap my pallets. And so there was a ton of dirt that was on top of the product, and it was supposed to be brand new product. Fortunately, my live sales, we like to have a lot of fun, and we called that pallet dust, and it made it an extra bonus. We love to joke around in my live sales. But anyways, that is something that you need to ask the question. If you're purchasing in bulk and it is coming from East Coast to West Coast or West Coast to East Coast, is it going by rail? So the BOL is basically the invoice that is being provided to the trucking company or the railroad that then knows where they need to take the item, what is your phone number, who do they need to contact when it comes to scheduling shipment being sent to you. That is just basically the secondary part of, once you've purchased your bulk wholesaler liquidation, the next step to getting the item sent to your doorstep. It's not as easy as buying a box of something and then just having it go to your doorstep. There's a lot more steps involved when it comes to the trucking aspect or just freight in general. Raw inventory or raw donations. I have had situations before where a wholesaler says, I have raw donations. So basically that is how you go to a Goodwill or any thrift store and you give them product as a donation. That is classified at that point as raw donations. They haven't touched it. They have no idea what's going to be in it. Typically, this is also the favorite thing that people have from what I've seen when you go to a Goodwill outlet, the bins, is when you find a garbage sack that has been unopened, that is classified as raw donations. People love that because Goodwill hasn't taken a look at it. They haven't stamped it yet. So that is what people are stating when they're like, hey, I have a pallet that is of raw donations. It's bin donations, so it might be in good condition, it might be in bad condition, it might be, all brand new condition, but you just don't know. It's a risk that you are taking, whether it is raw donations or raw inventory, because it hasn't been touched yet. They have no idea what's going to be in it. Sometimes that means that it's going to be a cheaper price because, again, it's blind. You have no idea what's going to be. They have no idea what's going to be in it. So the question is, are you willing to take a risk on something that you would be purchasing blindly? Another thing that I see a lot online is a wholesaler asking for your reseller certification. So this doesn't apply to me because I live in Oregon. Basically what a reseller certificate is it exempts the buyer from paying sales tax wherever you're purchasing your merchandise. They never collect the sales tax on behalf of the seller because you are then going to take that product and sell it. So that is when the sales tax actually has to be taken. As I stated, I live in Oregon, and so I don't need a reseller cert. Basically, all I need to say is my business is in Oregon, and typically most wholesalers and liquidators just waive it. I still have to show my EIN or what my business name is in order for them to have that in their records. But basically, it's just a way for you to exempt having to pay sales tax. I have heard that in states that do take sales tax, like thrift stores specifically, if you go in and you have a reseller certificate, you should be able to show that to them. And if you're basically stating that you're purchasing this product to sell online or just anywhere, they should be able to take off the sales tax. But I also know that some places are super picky and they don't want to do that. So it's just more so for the benefit when you're buying in bulk. Reseller certificates, you're going to want to look online and see what your state requires when it comes to this, because it could save you a ton of money. Shelf pulls. I kind of already talked about this one when I was referring to some of the other things earlier. Say for example, Target. Target is in the middle of transitioning their holiday season or their winter clothing into their spring clothing. So they are pulling off the shelves product to make room for new product to come in. Shelf pulls means that it's still brand new, no one has purchased it, so it's not like customer returns where someone took it home and then brought it back. It is literally pulled off the shelves. That means that it's going to be in good condition, hopefully. I mean, still you sometimes have damage. Also in this case, sometimes you have security tags on stuff, which I will link down below, the security remover that I use. It is hard to find good security tags. I'm just gonna say that right now, because most commercial companies do not want you to have their security tag remover, because you could potentially go into their stores and steal stuff. So eBay, I think, prohibits some stronger security magnets, and I know Amazon does as well. So you have to be very specific on the ones that you purchase. I have one that works really well. It still doesn't work on every single security tag that I find, but that is gonna be something that you need to invest in. More specifically, if you're purchasing from retailers like Macy's, Nordstrom's, Target, they would be the ones that would probably have a security tag maybe left somewhere in their merchandise. So if you're doing raw donations from, Goodwills or stuff like that, chances are they're not going to have a security tag on it, but I will link the one that I use down below. The final thing I want to go into is just other questions you want to start asking yourself before you hit purchase. So other things to start considering. How are you going to pay? Sometimes, surprisingly, you guys, they will require a wire transfer. So you have to take that in consideration, because if you are doing a wire transfer to a wholesaler, it's going to cost money. The other aspect to that is if you are wiring money, you need to vet this wholesaler. You need to make sure they're not going to take that money and run with it. So if you have the potential to find liquidators or wholesalers that are local to you, it would be really good for you to get to know them in advance. Also take a look at that. The Better Business Bureau, vet the person that you are purchasing from before you even start, because wire transfers can get a little muddied. And the reason why they will sometimes require a wire transfer is because if you are purchasing thousands of dollars worth of product, they need to make sure that that money is there right away. Sometimes they'll ask for a cashier's check. Some will do it through PayPal, so you can purchase that way, and then in that way you can also have protection over your items. Something else that I've also heard people do before is use a business credit card or even a personal credit card, but that also has some form of protection. So if something goes sour with the purchase that you're doing, you can then do a chargeback later. So that is something to consider, is first off, how am I going to pay for this product? So some websites you can go to and immediately buy something. It's just like, here's the box, it's 500 pieces, here's the cost of goods, here's a few photos. You're like, yes, I want it. I'm gonna hit purchase, and immediately it just takes it out of your debit card. Then there's other situations where it's an auction. It's like you have 1 hour left, you can bid on this item, and then if you win the bid, you'll have X amount of time to purchase your product. That is generally where I have seen wire transfers come into play. So there's a couple different ways that you can do purchases with big bulk inventory, and that's just one of the first things you need to start looking at. And also, is there buyer's fees? Is there additional fees when it comes to having a truck sent to your house? If it is in a pallet, are you going to need a lift gate? Is the place that the pallet is going to be sent to, is it residential or is it a commercial property? Because just those two questions alone might tack on an additional fee for you, especially the liftgate one. They have to have the right truck to bring it to you in order for the liftgate to be there. And so they're gonna charge you more because of that. Processing time versus shipping time. This one has bit me in the butt way too many times. Please make sure, do me a favor. Please ask this question. Please, if you get anything from this video, please ask this question. What is the processing time? So I have seen wholesalers who will sell a brand and it's like, hey, we have 500 pieces of Eileen Fisher. Do you want it? You say yes. There is a processing time. They have not actually created the boxes yet. It is like in big bulk pallets at this point. So ask how long it's going to take for them to process your box. I've actually had a situation before where I had a wholesaler reach out to me and say, hey, I have this brand. Do you want it? I said yes. I purchased. Literally 4 weeks later, I still didn't have tracking on that box. I'm like, what is going on? This was 500 pieces that I was purchasing. And they were like, oh, we're still waiting for the truck to be delivered. I was like, did you ask me to purchase before you've even seen the merchandise? And they said yes. So you wanna make sure you're not purchasing something as like a pre-sale. You wanna make sure the wholesaler has the product, and you wanna make sure it is gonna be processed in a specific amount of time. Is it gonna be 10 days? Is it gonna be 14 days? Because that plays a huge part in how much money you might want to invest in something. I've had scenarios before where it has taken over a month before I've actually received my product. I also know friends that through COVID, they had purchased like a truckload and it took 3 months before they finally got it. So you want to make sure you're asking that question in advance. It's also going to benefit you in the future. If they say, yeah, it's going to take 2 weeks, and like 5 weeks later, it still hasn't been processed, you could then go back to them and go, I would like a return, I would like a credit, because what you promised is not what is actually happening at this point. And then the actual shipping time. So once the tracking starts to go, is it gonna take me 5 days? Is it gonna take me 2 days to receive the item? They are different. Make sure you ask for both. What is the return policy? This could also bite you in the butt. If you are purchasing raw materials, raw donations, chances are, actually in most cases, I would say chances are there is no return policy. What you get is what you get. So there's a lot of frustration that can come around that. And that's why they do the different grading on their pallets. That's why they'll also say salvage or non-salvage, because they need to cover their butt. They want to sometimes under promise and over deliver, or is it vice versa? I can't remember. But I hope you hear what I'm saying. Like, you want to make sure you look at all these details before you hit completion and purchase, because you could end up in a situation where you're out thousands of dollars with product that is not sellable. The final thing that I would say is, can you see the pallet prior to purchase? So I know that there are some wholesalers that you can actually schedule an appointment, go into their store or their warehouse and say, yes, I want this pallet. No, I don't want this one. You can immediately take it that day, or you can immediately start working with a shipping freight company to have it sent your way. But you want to just see, if you are someone who might be risk adverse, like you're kind of nervous about taking a risk, it might be better for you to find someone that is either local to you, so you can build that relationship and network with them in advance, or you can actually see the product and go, okay, I feel a little more comfortable about this, I'm going to purchase. That is something that I will say in advance. I was gonna kind of talk about this in a future video, but I'll say this now. That is something that I am going more towards this year. I have been, I'm gonna be frank, screwed over so many times in the last 4 to 5 months that I'm really sick and tired of having my money hung up, having my money in limbo land, having product that isn't sellable, that I want to see it, I want to touch it, I want to build the relationships, and I want to network. So we're gonna go more into that in a future video about how do you find those opportunities. There is one other website that I did find a ton of descriptions on, and I only went into the ones that I felt like was really applicable for the purchases that I have done previously. I'm gonna put the link down below so you can go into that one a little more. The site goes into what the different grading means, factory restored, drop shipping, delivery windows, defacing. Defacing is actually something that you should know a little bit more about. Customer returns. So some of the stuff that I've already talked about, COGS, which is cost of goods sold. So there's a lot of terminology used in this one that I think is going to be beneficial if you are wanting to do your research and start to dig deep with this. My goal for this mini series is not to just throw all this information at you and just say, okay, now you know exactly what you need to do. My goal is to teach you how to do this, because it's going to take a lot of research. It's going to take a lot of networking. So I'm going to teach you basically how to fish instead of just handing you the fish. So that is it for this video. Make sure you come back next week where we start talking about how to purchase, and we're going to go directly to specific websites so I can show you how and what it takes to do so. I will see you next week. Bye, guys.